Pascal Antonini. I'm the vice president of an association called Isaka High, the French chapter of Isaka, and I'm also an associate in a consulting company called TNP Consulting, with after a few years at UI. So I will introduce the panel, my friends here on stage with me. So let me introduce Cyril Badeau. You are the vice president for Europe at Transquotient, in charge of the development strategy for the Europe region. And before that, you had expertise with various security publishers. Then we have Alexandre Dulenoy, coming from Luxembourg, from the Circle Computer Incident Response Center in Luxembourg, working in the field of research and operational. He will tell us more about this, and a developer of open source tools as well. And he has a project called MIST in particular that he can tell us more about in a moment. Then Benjamin Morin, you're the head of the division for the detection of the FR parts in ANSI. You have great expertise as well, technical expertise in the field of cybersecurity with Orange Labs and at the ANSI. And then Fabian Lemarchand, head of security for ManoMano. You will tell us more about what you do at ManoMano and your experience in the field of bug booting. So just to give you a bit of context and background information, so today we're going to talk about collaborating with the whole ecosystem in the field of cybersecurity, and this has become a more and more important aspects in the field as part of the increase of the incidents and attacks in particular, and the need to react as quickly as possible as well. So this collaboration is done obviously via sharing information and launching actions that has to be structured. So in order to do so, we have to improve collective intelligence. And this is absolutely essential. And the idea is to support and develop operational sharing and give a bit of context and hierarchy in terms of threats, and coordinate all this and track the response to incidents. So we'll talk about all this with our panel here, these various topics related to the stakes in collaboration and the practices that have been implemented, but also the initiatives that were launched in France and in Europe. So we'll start with talking about the processes that can be implemented at internal level within a company. In particular, when you talk about, well, the three main steps: how can you be prepared for a cyber attack? How can you anticipate the threats? How can you then detect those attacks? And when it finally occurs, how can you react, basically? So I will ask the first question to Benjamin Morin. Could you describe how these three steps are implemented, in particular within the ANSI, and how you are organized, basically? Sure, absolutely. So yes, I can tell you about the organization within the SFR for these three major steps. So first of all, I will talk about SFR, or SDO is the operational direction at the ANSI organization. So SDO is the implementation, if you wish, of SFR. So this sub-direction is made of three business divisions, which look after, first of all, capitalizing the information on threats, then knowing more about the threats, and then one other part about detecting the threats, and the third one is about reacting to those incidents. So obviously, given the size of these operational division, we had to make sure that we became experts in those various types of fields. And so we needed structure in terms of information and collaboration between the teams. This was absolutely essential at internal level. So as I was saying, we try to know more and to anticipate, and the role here is to basically capitalize on knowledge on the various types of attacks that exist and the weaknesses and the specificities of the malware. And this knowledge comes from the internal work that we do at ANSI, but also the partnerships that we can have externally as well. So when we capitalize, basically we produce memos on threat knowledge and obviously trackers as well. And these trackers are then transmitted to the detection division. And this division operates a supervision service SOC for the states, basically. So this detection division designs and develops and operates detection devices that are implemented in the various states departments. So in terms of the warning signs that are raised by this device, we can sometimes detect some of the threats and the attacks. And so once you have identified these warning signs and you conclude that there is an incident, then the detection division mentions it to the reaction division, and this division manages the incident in relationship with the victim of the attack. So obviously they receive this from the detection division, but also they receive information coming from outside as well, and they can intervene for the State Department, but also for other players too. And so as I was saying, given the specificity of each business within each division on the SDO, we had to implement processes to obviously run what we call internally the hand spinner with the 3 pillars that I just mentioned, which are so knowledge, so awareness, detection, and reaction. So just to finalize this background, there's a 4th division as well in charge of designing and implementing the technical infrastructure for the other 3 BUs, basically, because in fact, I mean, we'll talk about it later on in the roundtable, but the tools are absolutely essential to run this hand spinner. Indeed, so we'll talk about this aspect later on regarding tools. So I will now move on to Alexander. Could you please introduce, well, the means that were implemented to collaborate at international level and tell us a bit more? Sure, good question. In fact, the international level, as Benjamin just mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of information coming from partners, in fact. And if you remember, about 30 years ago, there was a high cybersecurity incident that was called the Morris Worm. And what was it? It attacked several infrastructures in the States, United States. This was the beginning of the internet. Everything was done. And so there was an organization that was created, early 80s. It's been more than 30 years. It's called FIRST. It might ring a bell. Some of you might know it. And so this is an international organization, multicultural, that gathers all the certs from all countries, so public ones. So the ANSI is part of it, Circle as well in Luxembourg and others, but also private ones, so private companies or such organization. Total in France, for example, is one of them. And this organization is used for collaboration. So there's one major issue in information sharing, which is trust. Do you trust the other people that you share information with? And this trust first created it by organizing physical meetings on a regular basis. People can meet, discuss issues related to incidents. It could be related to processes and tools, as we said just before, which is very important too. And so FIRST is really a platform for information sharing. And so there's a MIST tool that was rolled out for FIRST that can supply the database, but also share information in real time on indicators and trackers that enable you to look for information. So this is an international collaboration that works well. There's a European equivalent. There's also TFC CERT as well for Europe. And then there's also another group at international And there's discussions in between. So there's ISACs as well, by sector in the United States or in Europe, for energy in Europe, others in the United States. And these ISACs are also connected via FIRST, and they share information in real time. Thank you so much. Now, let me give the floor to Cyril. Cyril, what are the major stakes in terms of collaboration at internal level within a company? What are the key aspects that you have to face, and what should you have in mind? Well, yes, indeed, there's a kind of paradox, in fact, between the initiatives for information sharing that started a while ago between organizations, states, and private players, and the way the security operations in companies have evolved over the past 15, 20 years, where, well, to keep it simple, to be blunt, I mean, we collaborate far less internally than we do externally. So in most organizations, in order to basically do your job and your security business, we had to build silos. So the bigger the company, the more you have this notion of silos. Or there's people that are specialized, as Benjamin was saying before, some on detection, other on reactions, or patch management, others are in charge of scope and security or endpoint for certain organizations. And then we realized that when we structure it this way, the collaboration became quite difficult, and the virtuous circle that we mentioned before at FR doesn't exist everywhere. And so 90% of the activity of our teams is to support our customers to implement a virtuous circle to share and collaborate internally within its organization. So when you have a major organization with all the silos, and especially when you have subsidiaries in various countries with various scopes, multiple SOCs, and various types of answers to incidents, you cannot have a meeting every Monday morning to synchronize all this. So the easiest way to implement collaboration, be it active or passive, I will come back to that later on. The idea is to use information on threats. And I mean, it might sound, cyber information might sound a bit pompous, but you might think at very high level, but in fact, information on threats within a company to enable collaboration is just using the same words and using the same vocabulary to describe the threat the way you understand it in the company. So align with the risk management culture and the structure of the data, the common language for everyone. Given that it's defined, then you can automate. And for everybody to collaborate without meeting every Monday morning, then the information has to come in the right tools in each one of the businesses, in the right platform for the people looking after detection, or the person looking after patch management, and so on and so forth, to know what patch that has to be implemented in the organization. So to implement all this, so you need the right technical infrastructure to manage this notion of information, cyber information on threats, and you have to start by defining the data structure. In fact, there are standards that exist to share in between countries or organizations, but there's an issue related to the business. If you're a bank, for example, part of the risk is related to fraud, for example. So there's business analysts and technical equipment to deal with fraud. I mean, notion of IBAN, for example, banking data, or if you're an industrial player, the risk might be service continuity on the industrial environment. So, I mean, probably it's not the same types of threats, and it's not the same products. I mean, IBAN, you're not going to do much with it, but in any case, first you have to define within the organization, for your organization, if you have to define the threats, well, you use a standard, but what are the tools that you need? What do you use internally? And once you've defined this, then you can have a platform to use external information and benefit from information sharing in between companies, and then you automate to have very simple action. Let me give you one concrete example. For example, the several subsidiaries and the SOC in France detects an attack on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. And in fact, you realize that all three of them, in terms of information, is related to the same campaign. And then given that you share the information, then you have much more information or the types of attacks for the same type of that you haven't detected on this subsidiary. So it'd be interesting to see, first of all, for all this information, not only the three that you've detected, but all the other ones as well, are sent as a priority, and then once you've detected 3 times and you have an incident, then in this case you might want to use this to prevent further ones. So implementing this, if you don't have an automated process, for a lot of organizations that's very, very difficult. I mean, you need a change management process that can last from 1 day to 1 to 2 weeks. So attackers, they go much faster than that. So the use of information and automation means you can foster this type of collaboration. And then you can block a threat on the other side of the world because you've just detected something here that leads you to think it might happen elsewhere. So, it might be a passive reaction, but it works all the same. So this is the type of collaboration that is needed today to fight the actions, because the bad guys, they collaborate very well between them. So we have to break silos. Thank you so much, Cyril. So I'll look at Fabien now. We can talk about international organization and processes that can be implemented and all the tools that we can discuss later, but there's the human dimension on top of all that as well. Fabien, can you tell us a bit more about your experience and what you did and what you implement within Mano Mano? Sure, thank you, Pascal, for this question. Indeed, I'm going to talk about internal collaboration first of all, and then external later on. Well, just to share my experience at Mano Mano, I joined Mano Mano a bit more than 2 years ago. It was a young company, less than 10 years old, and they became a really European leader. For those who don't know it, it's a DIY platform and gardening platform online. And what I was very lucky because I started from scratch. Why? Because it meant I could put this at the heart of the strategy, and I could bring my integrated approach and find the maximum impact for a company like Mano Mano. So starting from scratch, basically the strategy that I implemented in terms of cybersecurity with my team, there's 2 pillars, only 2. Number 1 is the human dimension. So it's a real issue. And the first actions that were taken were not technical. In fact, they were human. This means that basically we implemented, we thought that the human dimension is the best way to fight attacks. So the first thing was collaboration, as we said before, and also done in an open and transparent way. So it had to be made clear and visible, understandable, communicating, and taking part in company meetings at all levels, at executive levels, but also with developers and in warehouses and so on. So we worked a lot on cybersecurity and making it visible to everyone, concrete to everyone, and very clear and understandable, to build this collaboration in both directions and show that we were open, and show that without this collaboration we couldn't have the best strategy to answer the real stakes, the threats and the risks and the needs, and so show the added value. So there was a lot of work which was done in terms of creating those links, and also we used the second pillar on which the cyber strategy is based, which is training the employees. It was more than raising awareness. We all agreed right from the beginning we had to trap the attackers, and so we had to do this at all levels and trap them. We run some basic tests, with USB keys, vocal phishing, ransomware, anything like this that made sense given the Mano Mano ecosystem and the threats that we could identify. And so we trapped them, and then in an open way, we explained the reality of things and the reason why, the added value basically, and we train them on a continuous basis. So we use this approach to really create the security culture, both in terms of collaboration in both directions, but also in terms of training, to extend the security team so that it's shared by everybody within the company and create added value and better understanding. So every time we talk about a cybersecurity issue, we demonstrate why it was important and why it will bring value and how it will answer the stake and how it will help them. So we worked a lot on this, on the human dimension, and in fact, this was the first actions before implementing technical measures. It was really the human and communication dimension to create an open link and train them as much as possible, because no matter what the technologies you have, I mean, this is my belief and my experience, but no matter the technology and the processes, most of the time, the last action to succeed in the cyber attack is the human action. So we really wanted to implement this and create a very strong basis. Once you have the culture and the understanding of cybersecurity, rolling out the strategy, the technical strategy is much easier. Because, I mean, you have the attraction and people are on board and they understand why we go in this direction and what value is going to bring for the company and for the employees. So there was a lot of work that was done in that direction. And then it was really to do with, I mean, bringing the teams together and we developed this blue team spirit, but not like a specific blue team, but just like a blue team through the company. So somebody, I mean, in the accounting department or the development of somebody from the management board, I mean, this is the experience where we did a lot of work on the human dimension, and then it helps us a lot now to adapt basically and to adapt to a company. Mano grows very, very fast in terms of technologies and visibility as well. So we had to implement that to be much more flexible and agile and have this return of information and feedback from the teams to understand the reality of risks and threats and stakes that we had to face. So roughly, this is my experience from Mano. Thank you so much. So we see, I mean, we lay the basis and the major stakes and the major principles at international level. At internal level, we talked about the human dimension, and now I would like to address Benjamin. Now we're going to talk about how we can share and how we can organize this collaboration, how can we implement the right automated device for collaboration. And Benjamin Benjamin will explain how we can use the development practices to support automation in this information sharing and improve the detection function, but reaction functions as well. Yes, for a while we've heard about a practice called detection as code, and I fully agree with it. And roughly the idea is to use the modern practices for software development, DevOps as that is called, and apply these methods to cybersecurity. So basically, how does it work? I think this idea is totally relevant because, I mean, as we've said before, you have to automate as much as possible at all levels of the chain. So why? Well, I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but basically, first of all, because there's no other choice. I mean, the attackers don't give us a choice. I mean, they're very agile, they're very fast, and so automating this, I mean, first and foremost, means you will have to fight with attackers. And without thinking about their flexibility, I mean, automation is also crucial so that the analyst teams that deal with the threats can absorb this mountain of information, which is so huge. And without any automation, it's impossible. I mean, human analysts can never process all this information. So the third reason why I believe automation is the way forward and is absolutely essential is that I believe automation is a key factor for collaboration to break silos. So why do I think so? It's because, in fact, automation means you need a structure in data. We mentioned it before. And it means you have to structure your knowledge as well. And so if you make sure that each player in the management team share the information and structure the information and makes it usable for the next player in the chain, then in a way people talk to one another. They don't have a choice, they have to use the same language to make this chain viable and fully automated. And from that point of view, we talk about language. I believe that, I consider that NitroTac is a great initiative to have a common language, so between the various players. So I will let Alexandre tell you more about it because he knows that much better than myself. But MISP is also a great project in that field, and it goes in the same direction. We need the analysts, once they analyze a malware or they analyze any type of attack, or after the investigation, we need the analysts to transcribe their experience, their knowledge into a structured basis so that later on you can use this information right away for detection. So, I mentioned MISP, but I could also mention the OpenCTI project that also goes in the same direction to structure knowledge that we have on the various types of attacks. So we mentioned trackers, we mentioned indicators, and the needs to structure them. I also believe that the community would benefit from a format, if you wish, a structure of what we call playbooks to automate and apply the procedures and the investigation processes. So it's great to have a wiki with all the documents, the way you can face an alert or an attack, or how you can investigate. But as long as this knowledge, this expertise is not structured, then analysts have to take manual operations, and then it's a failure. So you need a structure in your playbook so that analysts can dedicate more time to patching or improving existing procedures, create new ones as well, rather than operating them manually. So I believe there's a few initiatives that go in this direction as well, and I'm all for it, and I think they should be developed more and more, this notion of playbook and structure of these playbooks so that they can really be operatable. Alexandre, maybe did you want to say something about MISP, because Benjamin just mentioned it, and then maybe an additional question that I might have, because we talk about MISP and OpenCTI and maybe other approaches that exist, and how can they converge and not necessarily be in competition? Yes, I totally agree with what Benjamin was saying, mainly regarding the data structure part. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so the data structure is indeed a means to meet, and I believe that I fully agree with the fact that we use models and data structure that are common to all groups makes things much easier. So it automates and it makes it easier to understand data as well. The human dimension, sharing specific classification that are the same, that's really helps. I agree with you, the human dimension is very important, so, because if you don't understand information in the same way, it can create problems as well. So indeed, a lot of things have evolved, and Mitra attack was one of the biggest steps to define the techniques used by attackers, because it was a question of understanding, in what category you classify such and such type of threats. So the very first versions were the first step, and then it evolved more and more. And what we can see as well, there's quite a lot of initiatives that are in line with the playbooks and have common elements that can be used in those playbooks. For example, Sigma, an initiative which is very interesting because it describes how you can look for information in a very generic way, which means that it can be converted into the tool you will have internally, for example, for your own research. It could be Elasticsearch or whatever you can think of. And so Sigma enables you to do this type of thing, and there's still some gaps obviously between those various systems to describe and connect them, but Sigma, for example, there's Yara as well, there's another brick. we have quite a lot of indicators to be able to discover malware, but also other types of things too. And this information indeed should be better described. And there's a few formats that are being implemented on playbook description, for example. What standard will be the next one? It doesn't really matter, but it has to be supported by the tools. You mentioned various tools, and I believe that in the tools there's not necessarily any competition between the open source tools. What would be important is to see that the success comes from the connectors. I mean, if there's a connection, MISP, CTI, and so on, it means that the users can have access to several tools, because each tool has got their own specificity. It means, for example, focuses on the information sharing part, others on representing the information and the structure and so on and so forth. So basically, it's very common to have organizations using several tools. And so in order to do so, it's the automation part that makes a difference. So what's important is for people to an organization to have the ability to connect those tools. So this requires potentially a bit more expertise, but you have to increase the ability of your teams to work on the connection parts, APIs, and so on. Let me go back to the discussion we had to another roundtable yesterday about what's missing currently to make sure that it works, basically. Well, there's a lot of tools that do not have any APIs to interact with other tools, such as trackers that are produced by ANSI in France, that you want to integrate them in your products. Some products are not supported. So I would say this is one of the key aspects. Currently, people share, organization, they have the means to share and structure. It evolves in the right direction, but sometimes at the end of the chain for the automation, you still miss a few steps. So I hope that it will be less the case in the future with software developers and equipment, so that we have APIs that are common.
Okay, so maybe one initial reaction, Cyril, on the topic. I mean, totally agree with what has just been said. I mean, even on this particular point, a few years ago, tackling the problem was not easy because it was really an expert issue, and the interpretation of the expert gave the whole value of the information that can be manipulated with inter-attack. We've got a common reading on what has just been detected. So I think that it gives access to this topic, which is a lot easier for a lot of organizations, which benefit from the richness of the information. To be, they really want to go to the automation part, not organization of got analysts, but with all these tools structuring the information, it is possible, and they can be consumers and be part of a sharing community and comparing standards to standards. The progress has been huge. Cyril, I understand that when we prepared this roundtable that a lot of initiatives have been launched in different sectors to have this sharing organized. Yes, this is something which is constantly evolving. I mean, Alexandre quoted some sharing instances. I mean, there are several logics for sharing. The first one, historically, the most natural one, is to say, okay, if we do the same job, maybe we manage a risk the same, similar, but with the same opponents. If we share what we've discovered on the attacks, we can probably save time on the opponents. That's the ATSAP ATSAC that he was talking about. I mean, because the threats are similar in the same type of activity. Some stocks are to be paid for, but I mean, some subscriptions depend on the turnover generated by each company. So it was made, it was progressive somehow. I mean, what are ISACs? I mean, maybe not everybody is au fait with that. They are associations to share information. I mean, you subscribe to a flow corresponding to your activity, and I'll do a shortcut, but most of the information elements which are distributed to the subscribers are based on incidents that have been noticed in the same business. If you're part of ISAC, I mean, you've got obviously to convey the information that you've been submitted to. I mean, you've got an attack starting at the on one side of the earth, and we can inform other ISACs on the other side of the world. So there's an approach that was a general one. Now we've got more of a regional approach. We're doing the same business, so we've got a benefit in sharing the same community of information. New needs in this same logic. It's not ISAC, but there's a project with the ASRG association sharing information in the automotive industry. Most of the car manufacturers deliver computers on wheels now, not anymore cars, so they have to have PISA, an organization which will be able to tell you the equipment I've given you has got this or that weakness. So it's not just a closed mechanic box. We need a PISA. So it's a new job, and they are getting structured around that. Notion of vulnerability on components being put on board a car. Not to start from scratch, they created an association sharing information manipulated by the PCERT. I mean, it's not ISAC as such, but I mean, it's a recent organization. I mean, we need to have a specific person dedicated for this particular industry. So we're doing the same job, and we should share information. Then there's been different initiatives. We live the same country, we should share. You can CSSA.de, which is a sharing activity. 15 big German communities decided to share because they are all German. That means that they probably share the same components, and they can share the threads they've had on a vertical ISAC, which is their industry, and they can also share nationally also both. In France, we've got CIXA, a 2-year-old association, CIX-A. It aims at going over the French borders, but they mean to say that we're going to share analysts' time. If large members have got information analysts that can spend some time on a common platform, we can have access then to highly detailed report and share that to the members of the association. The idea behind that is that the major contributors come with their analysts adding an awful lot of value, and smaller subscribers who don't have this possibility will contribute less, but the quality of the information will be just as well. And the notion that we can see today, and which will speed up, it's an approach of sharing information on supply chain. I mean, I'm going to share my information. I'm quite organized. I've got collaboration in my different silos. It works, but I've got suppliers. Some of them are small. They don't have the same competence, no possibility. So I can create a community to share with them the information that I generated. I'm going to reduce my challenge of facing the risk, because it's my very close ecosystem, and if one of them collapses, I won't be able to produce. So industrially speaking, it makes sense. Let's give me an example which is public, but which goes along with that. And there's somebody in the room here which is present. The Ministry of Army have signed a defense commission with their main suppliers to do exactly that. The Ministry of Army has got a big possibility to anticipate. Some of the industrial players ran them same, sharing internally. So they have structured, therefore, what will become sharing in the ecosystem, which supplies technical competence in the Ministry of the Army. Alexandre, maybe to illustrate a little bit better this collaboration, I mean, how concretely do you set this collaboration up at international level also, from a warning given by a SOC? We very often talk about proactive information sharing with the information that we receive from trace, etc. But there's also collaboration based off what happens after the incidents. We've got the detection, we've got the incidents, and then we are an organization, and we've got to collaborate to face this incidents and answer this incident. So there's an evolution coming there. Approaches that we can see in Luxembourg and in Europe. A lot of incidents involve different partners. 1, 2, 3, or 4 set. It can be a private one, a public one. And what happens is that we've got to coordinate the activities during the response to the incidents, collecting evidence, which can be quite a painful exercise because it's tough, but the collaboration of the tools we use can be also used for data collection and data of evidence. So for incidents on ransomware covering European entities, I mean, we can see that this collaboration has to do with the collection of evidence and after that, there was a time delay because forensics used to work, then somebody worked on the report, then an analyst was going to analyze the report and then put that on the information platform, but it's time saving. Now, some people report and do the analysis on the platform and change the level of sharing depending on the level of the incident. So we can see that this evolution is coming up, and it allows to reduce the space of time because the hacker works quicker, but we can work on the indicators as the incident continues, because if I see a new type of ransomware, maybe the information shared, I've got a very short space of life. I'm going to be looking for Windows event information with a very, very short space of time, and I want to benefit from that as much as possible. So sharing that is as quickly as possible is very important. The sharing is done even during the incidents for the international collaboration. If I take FIRST or the CCIRT network, there's a pan-European network called the ANIES guidelines. Some of you know that. The national CERCIT share actively information and work on incidents, and we see that the activation on the answer on incidents provides a response sooner. So during the investigation period itself. Towards Fabiana, we talked quickly of Black Bounty and how hackers, ethical actors could help. What have you put in place in Mano, and what was the benefit from that? Before starting, I mean, I talked earlier about the need to have internal collaboration for it to be efficient. Once you have put up this basis, this efficient collaboration will help you make the best decision, and we're gonna save time for this crucial element, external collaboration. I mean, this is a crucial element because, I mean, given the increase of ransomware attacks and the increase of those events, we can't just do everything within internal team. We will never be able to follow all the new things and all the new modus operandi. So external collaboration is crucial, and one of them was to do at Mano Black Bounty for a reason, because Black Bounty is close to think as a hacker, as before thinking about a defender. So we do the Black Bounty to spread our security team, working with ethical hackers, and questioning ourselves continuously from a security point of view, and to be able to work our maturity level and to improve it depending on the incidents. In the security team, I mean, there's a good part of ethical hackers, and we do bug bounty to deploy this strategy and to have transparent cybersecurity and to add value to the company. And concretely, we proved to the collaborators that we were not telling them stories. I mean, when we find what we find in the bug bounty, I mean, we've got to give developers true stories, to put the human being at the core of it all, and to collaborate, to be proud of that, and to be proud to detect as quickly as possible the events happening. So we're going to work on concrete, real things, and we're going to try and be really very good at that and to do the best possible. So we've got a strong collaboration with these teams, and on a daily basis, we're questioning ourselves, we challenge ourselves. And then external collaboration, we do that a lot with other companies in our ecosystem, other negotiators, other tool merchants. I mean, problems are similar, internal problems are similar, so we can actually share successes and failures, and to share also for us to be more efficient and to concentrate on the true things, the true threats and the true risk, and to answer them the best possible way. What we're trying to do is that we know that the risk zero doesn't exist, and we're trying to have the greatest number of ethical hackers on our side than the other way around. So hence an increase of the help between us and better understanding. Another point is the an external collaboration with schools and universities to support students on the cybersecurity part, organize workshops and practical cases, and help the schools to develop the specialists and information they have access to, having open discussions with them. I mean, it's a benefit for us also. They are aware of an awful lot of things, so there's a lot of work done with the schools. And second element is an element which is more external collaboration, but to give a more of a social position in cybersecurity. These last few months, we've got I4U, which make us do a bug bounty, but for associations, we're going to share that with NGOs and associations. We're going to use mano mano ethical hackers and other ethical hackers to help associations with the same problem as the other companies have, and provide them support in this field. And this external collaboration will make sense, a social environment in this work, highlighting the importance of this issue and recreating a virtuous circle globally, because we're going to open it up to more security teams to have a strong community and to have as many ethical hackers with us than against us. So external collaboration is crucial. Very often we are short of time to do that. So automation is a very important subject, because we save time to concentrate on external collaboration, which is a major human lever, which takes time, but has a payback which is very good. That's what we're trying to work on, to bring the best answers, best responses. All those aspects are obviously necessary and make more and may make security more human. Benjamin, one point about, I mean, we're talking about sharing. I mean, there might be a paradox, because if we're talking about sharing, aren't we in an area where we can't share everything? So how can we manage the information that we share and the confidentiality of some data? We're accustomed to saying in ANSI that a marker only wears out if you use it. So ANSI doesn't use as a squirrel and gather information on the threat. This knowledge is shared with different partner circles, larger or smaller, depending on how sensitive those indicators are, because some of them are highly sensitive. So it shares that, and it also uses this knowledge of this information, and we use it in detection system to try and pinpoint hackers. Sharing with third parties or using those markers, we know that we open up this knowledge to the hacker, to the attacker. But I mean, that doesn't prevent us from sharing this information, but we've got to share who it's shared with, the third parties, and how they use it. The TLP marking is used by ANSI inside the CERT to define the policy to re-sharing information on the threat. Soon, in the ANSI productions, I mean, this information on sharing will be added to a use that can be done of markers. With this policy of usage of markers, the destinatory of the information will know whether this is only for research in a newspaper on an infrastructure controlled, or if it can be used as open source, if this marker can initiate blocking measures. But that's the information is destined only to the destinatory. If the information, if it falls in the wrong hands, makes this information totally obsolete as a result. today, ANSI's production as far as threat knowledge include marking policy, which will be added on with the usage, the authorized usage of this knowledge and information. I don't know whether, Alexandre, you want to add on a few words on this, or question for Benjamin, is it the PLP model? Yes, excellent. It's a model. It's interesting because, and I agree with what has been said, if we've got information and people use it in an unaware way, I mean, it might reach the attacker. Now, with the PLP model, it was created by the Bundeswehr, the German army, having the same problem on highly sensitive issues. And what we can see is that the PLP model is quite broadly used now. So if you use by this model, it's used in the Hives, OpenCity, and others, and you can use these tags in any free tools. And what's interesting is that now we can see, okay, I've got the information, so can I look for a total virus, or should I keep it in my CM? So the fact that the ANSI introduces it shows that we have information which is more and more actionable, and we can use it and treat and do something with it. So I think there are a few steps to be done in some tools for it to be incorporated. When you've got PIPAD and PAMBER, don't upload. Not uploading on a virus sample is probably good. So collaboration wise, it's a good thing. Thank you. I'll hand over to the floor. Do you have any questions specifically to ask our speakers here?
Dans des secteurs très concurrentiels.
In highly competitive sectors, I mean, there might be a reluctance for the safety teams to set up process of information sharing and collaboration and making those automatic. I mean, which approach would you suggest to convince doc management vintage? I can talk about the semi-public case and how they collaborate. I know everybody remember Aramco, a third country which didn't like the organization, wanted to destroy everything. And a lot of industrial players in the petroleum industry wondered, okay, potentially can we be faced with the same type of event? And it was the first discussion saying, are they creating a kind of privatized act at first to share information? And it's a hyper competitive activity. Exxon and Aramco are competitors, but they've seen the interest of doing it together because they said the loss I'm incurring, the total loss of operation on the crude production for 3 months or 6 months is means so much value that it is worth it. I know the group, and the group still exists. It shares a lot of information on physical risks. It's not cybersecurity risks, but there are physical risks. But to my knowledge, I know that in some cases there's been discussions with some crude specialists saying, okay, this information I'm not going to share because I've got the competitive edge on it. So, but they work at calculation. I mean, they weigh the pros and the cons, saying this vulnerability will cost me more than sharing information. They share a lot on SCADA, the tools. So it's interesting for them because what you can see in those groups, you were talking about CSSA, which is a group where at one point when 2 or 3 share information, they realize that it's in the interest of others to recuperate the information. But if you share, other people might be encouraging to sharing also information in their own activity, actually. So I think, in fact, that this problem that does exist, but in some cases, the problem no longer exists because benefit cost ratio, I mean, it's quite clear. In some activities, it works quite well. Knowing your activity might be a bit more of a problem. So I know that in the financial sector, in financial business, for exchanging information on banks, some banks are ready to share information, but for some other strategic network, they will limit the information they're going to share. Maybe anybody want to add on?
So yes, indeed. I think you have to be transparent externally, but also internally, first of all. And internally, it's not about just, meeting or others. To be very transparent when there's a security incident, when you see weaknesses, you have to discuss them in the company meetings or have an internal intranet. You have to be very transparent and try to have this notion of transparency and hiding and having this secret mode, which I think was the case in a while, is an obstacle to cybersecurity. So set the example in terms of internal transparency and say, right, we found the weaknesses and it means we did this and that and there was a major impact. But 9 times out of 10, you explain, you find a solution thanks to external collaboration because somebody from Blackbooting or somebody gave you the key or raised, the solution, or you will demonstrate, in fact, that external collaboration was crucial for this weakness, to manage this. Either you have a major impact for the company or you collaborate. And I think the number one thing before forcing external collaboration is to set the example at internal level, really advocate for it and foster it as much as possible because you have nothing to hide. And then afterwards you can then show to the managers the value of collaborating externally and being transparent with cyber teams in the same sector. And then you want efficiency. You'll show that they have the same threats, the same impacts, and so you just have to be faster and better and perform better. Yes, I like this expression of vintage direction. I think I'm not that young anymore around this table, so it's been a few years now that I've been working in this field, and I really understand this notion. And so what I saw and the evolution that we can consider quite easily is the evolution in the cyber risk and the global role of the organization. And we spent 15 years, discussing risks, and the worst scenarios for cyber attacks that we've been considering for the past 15 years are happening now, month after month. So, SolarWinds is probably something that we saw, we discussed 15 years ago already, but anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that the debate is wider than that. In fact, we'll be faced with hackers that will attack major companies, that will hack major companies, and they will not recover from it. End of the story. So to motivate them, I believe you have to look at the risk analysis, show them what it is and what the cyber risk is and the overall risk managed by the company, and maybe show a few examples. And we'll have more and more, unfortunately, but it's more than, just about slowing down the activity. It could change completely the business or the market, or sometimes kill the company. So this is where we are today, and this is and you have to talk to vintage managers in a way. Right, I think this is the end of our session of this roundtable. One last question, maybe. Sorry, we cannot hear you without a microphone. So just going back to what we said about these vintage managers, we talked about internal collaboration between several departments. and we talked about external collaboration with other departments in other structures, but there's also an issue related to internal collaboration, but with other players. Here we were talking about managers, but there's also issues with GDPR and everything that's shared when you have personal data. What can you identify tools or maybe automation or communication or others to improve this collaboration that you can have internally? So I mean, you can detect things, but when and how can you share? Because unfortunately, it's still vintage as well. I mean, it's often emails or phone calls, or even in bigger companies, you cannot find the right tools to do this, the right way of sharing information to DPOs and CEOs and lowers and so on. So I'll give you an example that may be interesting for you. We have quite a lot of users of the MIST platform in Germany that are the car manufacturers, in fact. So they have a structure which is rather interesting. In fact, all the car manufacturers, they have banks and the operation part. So the banking part, has got specific constraints in terms of risk. So it is quite split in between the two structures, but they have to have information on the risk associated to the industrial data and others without taking part in the incident. So what we saw, and I thought that was very smart, is that they rolled out a platform that recovers the incident reports, that they cannot contribute to them, but they have an auditing role, if you wish. They look at the incidents that took place over the past years, and then this is what we were saying about transparency before. They really have access to the data, concrete technical data with the strategic reports as well. Sometimes they cannot assess the data themselves, but they have an overview and see what the risks are. And so there's issues with compliance as well. They have concrete data because sometimes the compliance part and the risk assessment is often, how can I put it? It's done based on values that do not exist, or you have matrices with values that are. But if you have concrete data coming from your CERT, the SOC, with the right data, then you can use it to then show the evolution in terms of security for the company, but also approve and assess the risks. So, because doing a risk assessment without having the history of the incident and so on remains rather theoretical. So yes, and going back to what we were saying, we mentioned before the structuring the data so that it corresponds to the use we have within the organization. So it's very interesting to structure the data by integrating the context that could be interesting for certain departments that you might not include in the users in the IT world or cyber. What I'm trying to say is that basically all the implementation, sophisticated implementation in the organizations, no matter the technology you use, that aim at collecting and learning from various departments to have more information and know the threat better. But all this starts with the automation part for the technical collaboration, so not necessarily for DPOs and CEOs and others, but thanks to this collaboration, at this level, you can have more context that is specific to the organization. And so there's requests coming right away to create dashboards, just to monitor, basically, with the level of context for your own business or your own, level, so that you have an overview on what's happened from a cyber point of view, and have a very, the exposure to threats, for example, something that can be understood by somebody that has no specific knowledge. But this is something we see more and more for all the mature implementations, because you need to communicate internally as well. And when you, it's just a bit of a caricature, but when you have a request for, I don't know, if you have to stop a commercial business online, then you have to have the right arguments and you have to be credible before you do this. And so it's not enough to explain the technical aspects. So you need those dashboards for tracking for all the players. It's quite interesting, and it's essential to share with the teams. if I may, it's a real issue. And then something that I noticed and that I tried to do, I mean, you talk about collaboration for cybersecurity, but this is the case for many other topics as well. I mean, how can you make communication efficient and so on? And in fact, trying to integrate and not add cybersecurity communication, something specific, because employees, you know, they receive so much information, they have other fish to fry, and so it might work for a few months, but not on the long term. And I can see it at Mano Mano. I joined at the first year you can do lots of things, but in fact the real challenge is not to build, is to maintain on the long term this culture, this communication. And what I'm trying to do, but I don't have the magic wand, but in fact trying to always think to integrate your communication to the rest of the company, use the same system, the same tools as much as possible. So this can be done, but I believe that if you, I mean, you shouldn't try to have specific tools on top of what already exists. You can, you know, everything that's visual, important for the users, it should be the same font, the same format, and this, I would advise you to integrate it as much as possible, because we want security to be everybody's business, but if it's always seen as specific, it's very difficult to do. So yeah, so integrate as much as possible. I know it's easy to say, not easy to do. Right, thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers for taking part in this panel this morning. You see, collaboration is a fascinating topic and absolutely essential at international level, in between states and companies and sectors and associations. And all this is happening more and more in a structured way. And it has now become essential to fight cyber hackers and know all this better. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you to all of you. And I wish you a nice afternoon for the rest of this forum. Thank you so much. Thank you. Goodbye.